Welcome back to the Coach Poe Show. I'm your host, Coach Poe, and we're getting ready for another action-packed weekend of college football here in Division II. We start off, we've got a couple really big matchups in the South Atlantic Conference. We're going to take a look at some Gulf South action along with some other games that are probably going to have a pretty big impact here on Super Region 2 as we start looking towards the playoffs. I'm going to be joined here in a second by my good friend, D2 national columnist Chuck Bitner. He's back for another week of analysis and discussion when it comes to Super Region 2. So we're gonna dive right into it this week. We're gonna talk about it, look at all the big games, and then we're gonna circle back and look at our regional landscape here as we start getting into week 6, week 7 in college football. It's hard to believe we're here already, but without any further ado, here is Chuck Bitner. Chuck, welcome back to the Coach Poe Show.
Hey, glad to be with you again, Justin.
Absolutely, Chuck. So we talked a little bit about it in the open. We've got a couple big matchups, and probably the biggest matchup in the South Atlantic Conference this week is Lenoir-Rhyne traveling to Limestone, two undefeated teams in the South Atlantic Conference over in the Piedmont Division. Lenoir-Rhyne 5-0 on the season. Limestone had those two early losses. They've clawed their way back, undefeated record in the South Atlantic Conference. And now we're talking about an undefeated showdown on the road. This game, and I'm going to be honest, I was probably one of the people that, when Limestone lost those two games early, I was one of the people that probably wrote them off and said, just seemed to be out of sync, not really clicking offensively. Boy, they've really proved me wrong, and I think a lot of other people, and they've really got it rolling. This game is at home for the Saints. And then you look at Lenoir-Rhyne, who's just quietly been doing exactly what we said they were going to do. Methodically, they're 5-0 overall, 3-0 in the league, and just taking care of business. This is the first real big test for the Bears this year. So this game is a lot of hype. It's an early kickoff in Gaffney. So it's an exciting game here in the South Atlantic Conference this week.
Yeah, I sure think so. And you're right. I think, Limestone kind of fell out of favor very early in the season with the 0-2 start. But, when you look at that in retrospect, that's forgivable. Those are two very quality opponents that they played. We credit them for challenging themselves and getting out and playing those Gulf South teams because that you meet up with them in the playoffs, right? So it's good that they played those teams early in the season.
For sure.
But it's really a good kickoff to the divisional schedule in the SAC this year because when you look at that Piedmont division right now, every team in there has a winning record. So, things are going to change really quickly week to week here, but every team in there is actually off to a very good start.
They are.
And when we look at LR going to Limestone, you mentioned this, but it really is the first true test of the season for LR. I mean, I wrote about this in my column this week. Their closest game so far this year was a 14-point win at Fayetteville State, who's conference champion last year. So, that's really the toughest game that they've had. So to go on the road now, get into the division and play a red hot Limestone team, this is going to be a really big test for them and actually their first big one of the year.
It is, and their defense has been phenomenal all year. They've given up 10 points in league play, 27 overall. That's pretty astounding, and we talked about it a lot last year if you tuned into Inside D2 Football. Defense travels, right? And that can be your cornerstone. That seems to be the staple for the Bears this year. Offensively, they're putting up about 42 points a game so far, so they've been able to balance, having scoring points offensively and holding opponents to keeping them out of the end zone. So when you look at the other side of that, when you look at Limestone, they've given up some points. They've given up 54 points in league play so far, and they've scored 110. So offensively, they're starting to click. Like you talked about it. They lost those two Gulf South games early. Offensively, they start to click with Noller and Stewart in the backfield. And defensively, they're going to have their hands full this week. Dwayne McGee and that potent Bears offense, if they average 42 points a game, it's going to be hard to slow them down and do much with them if they can continue to do that.
I'll tell you, I'll give you a couple of things I really like about Limestone. One, I like that they've already faced some adversity.
Yeah.
And they're fighting their way through it. When you start 0-2 and you're a team that has playoff aspirations, you're starting off on the back foot, and they've really already fought their way back, and they responded to that. Another thing I really like is looking back to the win last week against Mars Hill. Mars Hill did exactly what we expected them to do in that game. They stopped the run, and they established the run themselves. And that's a recipe for winning for Mars Hill. And if I would have just looked at some of the offensive stats in that game, I would have said, that's a Mars Hill win.
Absolutely. 100%, Chuck.
But Limestone really found ways to overcome that. Even though they couldn't run the ball, Noller had a really nice day throwing the ball. I think he's a very underappreciated weapon in the sack. I really do. He's a player that just seems to get better every game, every time he's out there. He played really well, and even without a strong running game, which we know
Yeah.
is a strength for them, even without that, they overcame and beat a very good Mars Hill team.
Well, and you talk about the defense for Mars Hill. That's another solid defense in the sack. And so they're going against another one this week, and it's going to be important they can do some of those same things if they want to have a chance on Saturday.
No doubt, no doubt. And I guess one of the disadvantages now is there is every week now that you play, there's more that's on film. There's more
For
for
sure.
Lenoir-Rhyne to kind of figure out, where
Yeah.
they're going to adjust and where they're strong and where they can attack. But Coach Fury and his team are excellent at game planning. We've seen that, but in both of his stints there at Limestone. So they're going to be prepared. They're going to have a good game plan. But from Lenoir-Rhyne's perspective, I really do want to see their offense on the field again. And this isn't one of the stronger defenses in the sack that Limestone has. So they're going to need the best effort they've
Yeah.
got. And the problem
Yep.
though is there's just so much that you have to account for
Yes.
with Lenoir-Rhyne. Yes, they've got elite running backs, they've got some real playmakers at receiver, and now it's starting to look like maybe the shift to Jalen Ferguson at quarterback is possibly going to be a permanent change because the way he's played, how do you take him out of the lineup?
Agreed. And he's got the hot hand right now, and I don't think you do. I think you ride that and you ride the hot hand till it gets proven otherwise. And you're 100% right, Chuck. I mean, you're not going to take him out, and he brings a little bit of a spark. The offense has sparked it up. He's tough to handle because he can move with his feet. He's pretty mobile. He's got a pretty strong arm, pretty accurate balls downfield. So he's definitely a threat there. And I like that you said that they have a pretty deep receiver room, Chuck. I mean, they really do. They're receivers from top to bottom. There's not one guy, but there's two or three guys that can step up and make those plays. And in the backfield as well. If it's not McGee, they've got two or three other solid backs in the backfield that can carry the load. So it's a very potent offense. It just you got to figure out a way to get them stopped, to get them slowed down, and make them one dimensional.
Yeah. Yeah, I totally agree. But I am very excited to
Yeah.
see that Bears team go up against a really tough team that's playing with a lot of momentum.
And this is their gauntlet. They play Limestone. They've got Barton, Newberry, Wingate, and Catawba left. I mean, so this is the gauntlet right now of we're really going to get to see where Lenoir-Rhyne is. They were pretty heavily favored in picks on the show, on the Inside D2 show, to win the conference. And this is when they're going to have to do it now. Everything up to this point has been nice, but these are the games that it's that little bit of that meat grinder that we have to go
Yeah.
through.
Yeah, and if they win this weekend, the Bears will probably be a favorite in every game the rest of the season.
Yeah.
But pick any team out of that list and tell me which one's a bye week in there. Newberry, Barton, Wingate,
Yes.
Catawba, they're all playing very good football right now. So.
Without a doubt, 100%. So it's really kind of this is a big game, and if Limestone squeaks this thing out, they're sitting at 4-0 in the league, and they're 4-2 overall. I mean, we're quickly flipping the script a little bit, and hey, once was wrote off to now look where they are. So I think this is a really exciting game, probably the most exciting game I think this year in the SAC so far. So
Well, you might be right with that angle of if Limestone would come out with a win, that's kind of a landscape changer in the
yes,
SAC and in the region. If
yes,
LR wins, a third loss for Limestone is
yeah,
pretty much going to knock them out of the playoff race, and then things start to take shape a little
yeah.
bit sooner. If Limestone wins, that's kind of a landscape changer in the region. So
It
I
really
can't
is.
wait how it plays out.
Yeah, for sure. And so the other game to me that's kind of picking my brain a little bit, and I'm like, okay, this game has a little bit of potential, is Tusculum and Carson-Newman. And you're gonna say, wait a minute now, but Tusculum's sitting at 2-1 in the league, they're 2-3 overall, and Carson-Newman is 1-2 in the league, 2-3 overall. This is a big game. If Carson-Newman, who goes to Newberry last week, wins in the graveyard, it's just pretty much a big win for them. And this is kind of when that momentum started for them last year. Be interesting to see if they can kind of recapture some of that fire that they were able to get through last year. And this game could, Mars Hill right now 2-1. They've got Erskine this week. You got to probably think they're gonna pretty good chances of going to
Win.
3-1.
That's a win.
I mean, so now whoever wins this, this game is pretty much right there at that, if Tusculum wins, they're going to be 3-1. If Carson-Newman wins, you got two teams at 2-2. So this is a pretty big game on the mountain side of the division.
I don't even want to touch this game because
Yeah.
I have absolutely no idea
Yeah.
how it's going to go. First of all, it definitely is worthy of our attention. I almost put this into my national column as my off the grid game
Yeah.
because it is a rivalry for these two because they're the closest
Yes.
closest neighbors for each other in the SAC.
Yes.
You know, the two teams that are in East Tennessee
Yeah.
in that region. So there is kind of a natural built-in rivalry there. At times, a little bit gets a little chippy. At times, there's a little bit of hate
Yeah.
involved in it. But really, yeah, to go back to what I said, I don't want to touch this because I have no idea what's going to happen. Just because both
Yeah.
teams have been so inconsistent. They've had their moments. You know, Tusculum going
Yeah.
to Wingate at what were they 0-2 at the time, and put in a really
Yeah.
really gritty
Yeah.
performance and came out with a really hard earned victory. And I thought, wow, this team might really have something. Maybe they can really cover like the way Limestone did.
I know. Yeah.
And but they've been a bit inconsistent since then. And then they had a chance last week against a good Barton team, but couldn't finish, and
Yeah.
then lost that one at the very last minute. And Carson-Newman, I pretty much totally wrote them off after the Lenoir-Rhyne game because they got spanked by Limestone,
Yeah.
and then they battled against LR. Give them credit for that. They battled, but they just weren't good enough.
And I
And I
think
thought,
everybody did, Chuck. I think to your point, everybody did. I think everybody kind of said, all right, they're done.
yeah. And then they go to Newberry, which, I mean, you and I both know that is a tough place to win.
That is not easy. At night?
That is
Yeah.
No, that's
Yeah.
probably the smallest hostile environment I've ever been in. It's it's
Yeah.
a small place, it's intimate, but the fans pack that place, and it is a tough place to play. It's a tough place to win. And boy, they just really hung in there all night. They battled,
Yeah.
and they made the plays at the very end, which is something that they have struggled to do.
You're 100% right.
So now, coming into this week, it almost feels like we're due for the exact opposite to happen, and Tusculum will play really well.
Yeah.
Carson-Newman will struggle, but I really don't even have a pick for this game because I just don't know.
Well, and I think if that happens, I think you're looking at a two-team race between Tusculum and Mars Hill. Carson-Newman wins this game. I think you're talking two teams at 2-2. You're not out of it by any stretch of the imagination at this point. So it completely, it could be a staple game for Tusculum, but if Carson-Newman finds a way, boy, things change on that side of the division real quick. So,
yep.
And so that those are kind of the two big games, Chuck, that I think this week in the South Atlantic Conference that are of note and that really have some big implications. And when we talk about big implications, I think everybody's kind of been talking about this, whether you're in the South Atlantic Conference, you're in the Midwest, you're out west. That we have a top 25 matchup between two undefeated teams in Valdosta State and Delta State. And this is a big game, and this is a game as you look at it. We talk about it. Delta State wins the conference last year. They're doing everything we kind of thought they were going to do this year. They've won the games we thought that they were supposed to win. Then comes Valdosta State. And Valdosta State, we didn't really know what to expect. We've kind of said all year, hey, you've got to prove it to us. We're not going to buy in until you can get us that win. And don't look now, but they're undefeated at 5-0, hosting a really, really good Delta State team. Got some question marks on offense. We don't know if Patrick Shegog is going to play, not play. We don't know where that sits. But man, you look at this game, and this is, to me, when I think of the Gulf South Conference over the years, this is that game with two of the premier teams in that league. And I think it's going to have huge effects potentially within Super Region 2, and it directly is going to impact, I think, the SAC. But man, this game is exciting, Chuck. I don't know what your thoughts are on it. I think you probably share the same sentiment, but it is an exciting game that we're going to have this week.
I've been waiting for this game for a couple of weeks because we kind of knew what we were going to get from Delta State coming into the season because they were a very, very good team last year. A lot of the pieces were still in place. We knew what we were going to get from Delta State. We really didn't know with Valdosta, because things really kind of went sideways for them last year. We just didn't know how much improved will they be. Well, here they are at 5-0, and it's kind of interesting because if you go back almost any point in time over the last almost 20 years, a 5-0 Valdosta State team is probably a top 5 team in the national polls.
Yes.
But here they are kind of barely in that top 25. In ours, they actually are number 25.
Yeah.
So a little bit of a different scenario, but neither team, to kind of piggyback off we said with Lenoir-Rhyne, neither team's really faced an opponent that could really push them.
No.
Valdosta struggled a little bit at Chowan last week, but there were some other factors involved there. But neither team has really played a team that could match their talent and really for 6. And now we're going to see that happen this week. And I'm very excited to see where that goes. So I think what you're going to see is a lower scoring game than probably most of these teams have played so far. And I'm really curious to see that, there's a lot of talk about Valdosta State's defense because that was their problem area last year.
Right.
And I actually think they have come a long way. I put some stats in my column about how much improved they are, even just on the stat sheet. But actually, what I really want to see is Delta State's defense against a very, very good and probably underrated Valdosta State offense. Sammy Edwards, the quarterback of Valdosta State, if you look at his numbers, he is right up there with the national leaders in almost every passing stat. And boy, he is doing a phenomenal job with distribution. I think they've got something like 10 different players that have caught a touchdown pass this year. A lot of different players that are catching balls. And I'm actually really curious to see Delta State's defense and how well they perform against a really good Valdosta State offense.
Yeah, and that's a great point, Chuck. I think that this is going to be a test for them defensively. And I felt like at times maybe their defense missed some plays that they should have made and has let opponents in the game. So this is going to be a big game. But when you talk about the stats, and this is really what got me and really got me like, wow, because, we talk about Delta State quite a bit. But when you look at the comparison, particularly in the Gulf South Conference, they're 1 and 2 in a lot of categories. And when I'm talking completion percentage, kickoff returns, passing efficiency, touchdowns passing, passing yards per completion, rushing touchdowns, and yards per pass attempted. I mean, they're 1-2 in so many offensively. I think you're onto something. I think it's going to come down to whose defense flinches first, who gives up that big play. And I do think the other side of that is we know that Patrick Shegog got hurt last week. Where is he? Is he back this week? Is he not back this week? What are we going to see from him? Because, I think with him, I think the Delta State offense is a lot better. I think they're more in rhythm. He's seen some things. He's been in these big games before. If he's not out there, I think that changes their offense a little bit. Whereas Valdosta State rather, they've had to grit through some stuff. Yes, maybe the competition hasn't been that good, but I do think there's been, we talked earlier about Limestone playing a pretty tough schedule, but there's something to be said about playing I'm not going to say an easy schedule because there's no game in college football that's easy, but when you can play a schedule and you get some wins and you get some confidence, that could change your team as well. So I don't want to lose sight of that either. That Valdosta State, you can say what you want about their schedule, and we did say it. Hey, you got to prove it to us. But at the same time, you know what? Getting that confidence and you feel like you can beat anybody. Delta State's just another check, a check off the list. So I'm not going to count Valdosta State out, but I'm with it. I think we're on the same page. You got to prove it to us. You got to show us something here.
So, Justin, I have a question for you because you've coached in Division II. You've been in game planning meetings where you kind of break down film and you kind of set up your game plan and all the different things that you have to account for. So we think Patrick Shegog is probably fine.
Yeah.
He did leave last week's game. There was an injury timeout, didn't come back in. At the time he left, the Delta State scored the next play to go up 28-0.
Yep.
I think they were up 37-3 or something at the half. So we think Shegog was held out precautionary. Nonetheless, if you're Tremaine Jackson and his staff, do you have to they're going to prepare for Shegog to play, no doubt about it. But do you have to look at that film from last week and look at the backup skill set and at least have some thoughts and be prepared in case he is going to play?
You do. I think you have that plan of, is Shegog going to play? And let's be honest here. There are no secrets in football. You have people you're talking to, whether he's going to play or not. You have a good feeling if he's going to play or not. But you have that game plan. If he plays, this is what we want to do. These are some of his strengths. These are some of his weaknesses. Here's where we can exploit some stuff. And you're going to have a backup plan for that backup quarterback. And that may be as simple as just disguising some coverages, maybe being a little different up front, maybe some shifts late, things like that to throw him off. Because again, he hasn't seen the reps and hasn't seen some of the things that Shegog has seen. So, you're going to do some things, and it doesn't have to be that different or that difficult, but you could shift a little bit, maybe disguise some coverages, stuff like that to kind of throw him off. That's what I would be thinking about. I wouldn't try to change too much because what you're doing defensively has worked, because you got to have a plan, because you may not know if he's going to play until pregame warmups. And even then you still may not know. And it may not be until the first offensive drive to know who's in the ball game.
So let me pick your brain on a couple of other coaching tactics, because I think there's a lot of really interesting angles to this game.
Hold on one second, Chuck. And I would say this, because on the flip side of that, right? If you're Coach Cooley and you have a quarterback and yes, he got banged up. Yeah, you got your game plan, but depending on where that injury is, depending on what that may look like, you're going to sit there and you're going to have a script if your backup quarterback is in. These are the plays that he knows. These are the 10 to 15 plays that he probably feels pretty comfortable with. And if we have to go to that, that's the plan. And you know that ahead of time. And then you have something like this happen. Coach Cooley and that staff, they're great coaches. They're going to have that backup plan, the same as Delta State or Valdosta State's going to have their backup plan. They're going to have backup plan. So believe me, they sit in there and there's no sleep on either side. I promise you that.
All right, I think I pushed some buttons here to flip on some old coaching instincts for you, because the passion just started oozing out of you there. So yeah, I want to tap into this a little bit more.
Okay.
If you're Valdosta State,
yep.
And so here's where I'm going with this. We know coaches are always looking for the right ways to motivate their team. They're going to look for any little thing that they can try to get the kids focused, motivated, working hard, all that stuff. So if you're Valdosta State, last year, Delta State absolutely humiliated you. They really scored on every possession. The only times Delta State had the ball and didn't score was at the end of the first half and at the end of the game. Other than that, scored a touchdown on every drive. They absolutely humiliated them. This year, we expect it to be a very different story. So from kind of getting your guys to really sort of tap into all the energy that you need them to find to hit their emotional peak for this. Are you going to talk about last year at all, or do you just completely leave that behind you?
It's probably been on their scoreboard if I had to guess. That's what I would do. That score would be up on the scoreboard. It'd be in the locker rooms. You're not going to forget what they did to you. You're not going to talk about it. You're not going to dwell on it, but you're not going to let them forget about it. You're going to rip that Band-Aid off. You're going to pour some salt in that wound, and you're going to let them know that this game means a little bit more. This game isn't just another game. This is a game where if you're Valdosta State, you're going to put everybody on notice that you're back and that you're here and you have every intention of winning the Gulf South this year. That, without a doubt. You win this game, you're undefeated. You just beat Delta State. Okay, let's go. You know what I mean? And I think you're showing it to the guys. You're talking. You're not necessarily talking about it, but it's there. You bring that back up. On the flip side of it, if you're Delta State, you know that. You know that they're going to come for you. Now, I'm a firm believer as a coach that, look, it's not my job not to score. If my 2s and my 3s are in, they deserve the same opportunities. I shouldn't just have to run the football. Now, I'm not going to throw the football, but I'm not going to just call plays to, maybe get out of the game, things like they've got to get some opportunities as well. And it's your job to stop us, right? So I think from that perspective, Delta State, and believe me, there's a history there between these teams, right? But they went down and did what they had to do. And so I think they know that, there's a little bit of a target on their back. You win the league, there's a target on your back. You got to go out there and you're going to get everybody's best shot because everybody wants to beat the league champs. And this game's no different.
Yeah. And I think if you're Valdosta State, you also are definitely looking at this and you're kind of thinking about the fact that this is your chance to prove to everyone, we are not last year's team. That was a year ago. We are not last year's team. We are the Valdosta State Blazers that and got familiar with over the last quarter century. We are an elite program.
And this game is at home. And I think that's important too, right? Like it's in Valdosta. So this game is, it's going to be a crowd there. It's going to be a heavily favored Valdosta crowd. And having been there, the way the stadium sets up, it can be a tough place to play with the band right behind you. And they make it a pretty hostile environment. So it's not one of those, it's not a field or a stadium that's, and the fans are right there on top of you. There's not a lot of space for the visitors to the stands. And so it's kind of tucked in there in the stadium and stuff like that. So it's one of those things that's at Valdosta, and they're not going to, the fan base knows how important this game is. And they this is kind of that show me moment to them too, I think, Chuck, for that fan base. Show me.
Yeah.
We're going to show you we're back. We're going to show you what we have. I think this is that for them too.
I agree. I think this could be the game that really gets everyone back on board.
Yeah.
Because I sense a little bit of hesitancy from the Valdosta faithful, who are very faithful followers of all the things that we do
Yes.
at D2 football. I sense just a little bit of hesitancy to really kind of buy in and say, yeah, this is a 5-0 Valdosta State football team that can go really far, or are we a 5-0 Valdosta State football
Yeah.
team that's playing well, but we haven't played the Gulf South yet?
Well, and that's it. And I think they kind of have the same mentality we might have of you have to show me something, and this is that opportunity. Now, that's to say that if this game isn't a shootout and it's a 42-41 ball game, final, either way, I don't think we're sitting here saying, oh, this, if, this team's better than that. I mean, it was a shootout, and that it very well could turn into that, a 42-41 ball game. And if it is, it's just who had the ball last. And so that's a very possible thing, a very good possibility too. And at that point, at least I'm questioning myself, saying, hey, if Delta State wins that ball game, are we saying either way, no matter how that game ends up, it's a 42-41 shootout? Are either of these teams really that bad? You know what I mean? Like they did what they thought we were going to see, so
Yeah.
that.
And the other important piece of this is, the loser of this game is going to be a 5-1 football team that has a lot of football in front of them to play. Like everything is still in play for the loser of this game, but there is a lot at stake. And I think, just looking at this from the outside, I think there's more at stake for Valdosta State here.
Without a doubt. And I think this is this game right here is why you go to one of these programs, why you go play in the Gulf South Conference, because of a game like this with this kind of implications. That's not to say, and I think you're right, it's not to say that this is going to end somebody's season, because I think both of these teams, if they continue to handle their business and do what they need to do, are going to find themselves in a good position when it comes time for the playoffs. But this is a game that can separate you, get you that home field advantage, or get you a better seed in the playoffs. And this is that game. But again, this is a game this is why you go to one of these schools. Go there to play in these games, to have this type of pressure, to have this type of atmosphere. That's what this is all about.
Yep, totally agree.
So, and so I think when you look at that too, Chuck, and I think from a national perspective, we've talked about 3 pretty big games that are really going to impact Super Region 2. Any other games that maybe we haven't talked about or that we're thinking about, hey, may have an implication here as we start thinking about the playoffs here in a couple weeks?
Yeah, for sure. We've kind of had this theme that we've been able to talk about tonight about teams that are really kind of getting their first big test of the season. And another one that really comes to mind for me is Benedict. And I have been really impressed with this year's Benedict team. And I'll admit, looking at this year's Benedict team, I was still early in the season very heavily influenced by the playoff loss to Wingate last year.
Yeah.
And I've moved on from that, and I'm all in on this Benedict team. I think they're really good. They're very well coached. What I really like about them, Justin, is that they play at the same level every week, no matter who the opponent is.
Yeah.
And that's hard to do in any college sport. That's hard to do, especially when you're outclassing the competition like they are.
And that's a good point.
They've got to go ahead and follow up.
No. Well, so there's 2 points you made right there, Chuck. And I didn't mean to cut you off, but the first one I think is, they've been consistent, and I think they take that away from that Wingate loss, right? Like I was at that game last year, and you watched a really solid defense pretty much neutralize any offensive attack that Benedict had. And you look at that and you say, they have all offseason to look at that. Guys, this is, look at what they were able to do consistently. That's what they've modeled themselves after. And I think you're 100% right. It has brought that consistency up. And then the other side of that too is, week in and week out, regardless of who the competition is. That is the hardest thing, Chuck, is when you have to play a team that maybe isn't to your caliber or, isn't to that standard, maybe don't have the playmakers you have, but you still got to go out there and execute and keep the standard. That is the impressive part. I think you're 100% right on that.
Yeah, I think that they have just really been doing an exceptional job of that. And they've got a big test this week against a very good Miles team. Miles is 4-1. They beat an FCS opponent, and their only loss on the board was a 1-point loss at Arkansas Pine Bluff, who is a Division I opponent. So, and they're coming off a 1-9 season. So, they're really rolling. They've got a ton of confidence. So, I think Benedict wins that game, but
Yeah.
it's going to be a good one. And, it's definitely something that I'll be watching for on Saturday, looking at the scores on that one, because I'm very curious to see how it goes.
And the other thing too, Chuck, I think when you talk about Benedict, I don't know if they aren't. I don't know if they're where they are today if they don't lose that game to Wingate last year, right? Like, but like that was kind of the gut punch maybe they needed. Not necessarily the coaches, but the players and the program to say, hey, this is good, but we got to get to the next level. We got to become elite. And
Well,
but they're
becoming good is a process,
yeah
right? I mean, you know that. Like, being good is a process. And
yeah
last year, to you be perfectly honest, last year was really the first year in a long, long time
yeah
that they were good.
yeah
This is a program that prior to last year, I mean, 5-5 was a good season for them.
yeah
And
yeah
to all of a sudden go to undefeated conference champion, that's a huge first step to take. And, they don't have to be an undefeated conference champion this year to take the next step. The
right
next step to me would be, winning in the postseason.
right
And I think that they're setting themselves up for that. And, before we close for this week's episode, I wanna read off a couple of numbers to you.
okay.
And those numbers are 0, 0, 7, 3, 3.
The points they've
That,
given
that
up.
that's not that's not a locker combination or an ATM code.
Yeah.
Those are the points by game that Benedict has allowed this year.
Yeah. Wow.
It's 1 touchdown and 2 field goals in
Wow.
5 games. I don't care who you're playing. That's unbelievable.
That's impressive. That is really impressive. And that just talks about that program and where they've come from and where they are. And I had the opportunity to go down there last year and I think they come on the scene, you kind of, what's this program about? Facilities are great. Program, was great and it was a great environment. So it's, I'm not surprised they are where they are. I think the coaching staff's doing a phenomenal job. And then on the flip side of that, you look at Miles, that, kind of starting to go in that progression, a 1-9 team last year. They're competing at the FCS level, not just winning games, but, competing. And that you can't say enough about that. And, they're going in the right direction too. So it's an exciting game. Again, I think you're right. I think we're going to start seeing, these games are going to start impacting, the seeds and things like that when you start talking about Super Region 2. So it's a lot to take in this week. We have a lot of really big games and it's really exciting.
Yep, lots going on. I appreciate you having me on to talk about it.
Absolutely. I appreciate it, Chuck. And everybody, thank you for tuning in. I hope you enjoyed this week's episode. We have a lot of action-packed games this weekend. So get your popcorn, get your soda ready, and enjoy your college football Saturday. And we'll see you next week here on the Coach Poe Show.